This is Art 490, Baroque art. This first video is on Baroque sculpture. To understand Baroque art, let's first look at a sequence from the Greek period to see the kind of things that occurred in this completely different culture. This is the archaic phase of Greek sculpture. And this is the early classical phase. This is classical, and this is the later classical. And this was followed by the Hellenistic, characterized here as a movement away from the idealization of classical art to something much more real. That is, this is an example of realism, and it also exhibits emotionalism. That is, it is attempting to cause an emotional response in the viewer. There's also in the Hellenistic period, which many different styles occurred in that period, but the motion and emotion also being expressed. So you begin with a movement in the direction of sort of the intellectual ideal, a timeless perfection exhibited in the very the highest of the classical phase, and then moving away from that towards something like this is not quite timeless because it still has a story being told in this one, and a little bit of exaggeration from what was the ideal. So this is even in the later classical period, they're moving away from it. But as you move into the Hellenistic phase, all of those things are gone, and new priorities are exhibited. One is that this emphasis on motion and emotion and realism. Well, if you map that sequence onto the Italian Renaissance, what you have is you first have this early period in the 1300s. This is Pisano, Madonna here. This is comparable to the archaic phase, and in Greek, and the next in the 1400s you have Donatello and Verrocchio. These are more of the classic phase, the early classic phase, and then Michelangelo would be comparable to the high classical phase here, though it also is similar to this one in that it's telling a story as well. So it's not entirely timeless. It's sort of splitting the difference between these two, in that it is the perfect, ideal, timeless image of the figure, just as the Greek high classical was, but it's also kind of telling a story, sort of like this one is. So this maps perfectly well to Greek history. And after the Renaissance, because of socio-political changes that were occurring, things changed. In the Mannerist period, they introduced motion and emotion, just like the Laocoon here, and also realism, as you see in this work by Maderno named Saint Cecilia, we'll be looking at in just a moment, and Bernini's David, which also has the motion and also some realism and other aspects we're going to get to. But the Baroque qualities of these are what we're going to be focusing on. But I want to show you how this relates to the Renaissance, and how this sequence as a whole relates to the similar sequence that had occurred in the Greek period. Saint Cecilia here is a martyred saint from I think the 2nd century AD. So it was very, very old and very early, and it's not clear exactly what her story was, but she was a Christian at a time when it was illegal in the Roman Empire to be a Christian, and she was martyred. And for whatever reason at the time, they made a church on the site of her house, and they put a tomb in it, and her body was put in the tomb. And it stayed there until 1599, just as the Baroque period began. And when they decided they were going to make a new tomb for her, because one of the characteristics of the Baroque is that there's a kind of a veneration for martyrs that had occurred as a result of the Counter-Reformation, which we'll talk about later. But because of this, when they opened that's the reason for opening her tomb and creating a new tomb in a new church and everything. But when they opened the tomb, they found that her body had not decayed. In fact, it looked exactly like you see it here. And this is a marble representation. So what they did was, once they saw that it was a miraculous event of a centuries-old body that had completely uncorrupted, they got an artist to come and record exactly the pose that she was in so that he could create a marble sculpture. And that marble sculpture is sitting on top of her tomb to represent exactly the way she was and to record that miracle. Here, and then they put, I guess it's behind glass and it's lit. So we see what the figure is lying down is in, like the way she would have been in her tomb. She's still wearing the robes that she was wearing then and some sort of cloth thing on her head. She has marks on her neck where the executioner hit her with an axe or blade of some sort. There's a mark there. There's a couple of more there. So I think she was hit 3 times. But the way this is rendered is an example of realism and emotionalism. That is, it's almost a direct parallel to the dying Gaul that we saw in the Hellenistic period, in that it's very realistic. It is designed to look exactly like, or largely like, what you would actually see, but at the same time, it's evoking an emotional response. As far as sculpture goes, this is a unique example of realism. That is, a desire to record exactly what something looked like without changing it. Apparently, this is a position of her hands. More detail, even the drops of blood that were on her neck. Recording what something really, really looks like is a different thing from the High Renaissance, where there wasn't any interest in recording exactly what something looks like. It was to record the ideal of something, the way something would look in the ideal world. And in that ideal world, they may want to record that exactly the way it would look in that ideal world, but that's not real. This is an example of real. That is an attempt to record something and show what it actually looked like. The backside is not carved to as much detail because being inside the tomb is not visible. But you can see the back of her head here, the other marks on her neck, and that this is simply what we believe to be a true recording of something. And although in sculpture this doesn't occur very much, as far as I know, this is the only one. But in painting for the Baroque period, this will be one of the major themes that occur throughout. Is some artists will be very interested in representing the world exactly as it is seen. And this contrasts greatly with another aspect of Baroque, just as the Hellenistic period had very vastly different styles within it, and the only similarity they had among them was that they were different from the classical period that preceded it. This contrasts with this kind of thing that also is Baroque, and this in fact is much more typically Baroque, in that it's an example of theatricality, emotion, and over the top decoration and excessiveness. This is an image of of a saint in a tomb similar to the previous one we saw. But in this case, it's done by an artist who wants to um, almost shout the what he's trying to say here in the emotion of this person, and exaggerate all of the that emotion by amplifying it using movement of drapery and different colors of drapery. Like there's lots of different materials are going on here with the gold and the white marble and this other, I'm sure, very expensive looking marble that's been carved so as to give this sense of something of import and grand theatricality of presentation. So this is Bernini, and he will be, one of the major figures of the Baroque in terms of sculpture. Here's what it would look like with Bernini making a portrait. This is a portrait of Louis XIV. That is, he was called to Paris to see the King of France and asked to make a portrait of the king. And in this period, you don't just make a portrait of the king. It's what we're looking at. First of all, it's a bust. It's not the full figure, but it's designed similar to images of Caesars that occurred late in the empire. In that it's filled with lots and lots of details, lots of stuff going on, a variety of textures. Look at the hair, the little lace collar here, the metal of the armor, and this cloth. He's very good on the cloth. That is, using cloth as an expressive thing. It's as if he's wrapped himself in a sheet and it's blowing in the wind, and that wind expresses his, I don't know, his majesty or some grand quality of him. He's been idealized with this pose, with his chin up and looking out towards the future in such a way as to show how, I don't know, grand and pompous he is. But looking at all these features together, I mean, you get a sense that the artist, I mean, he's doing an image of the king, and the king wants to look as good as possible, and wants to look as grand as possible. And in this period, everything seems to be done in an over-the-top manner, or at least this aspect of the Baroque. That is, if doing things up to say 100% is sufficient for expressing what was necessary, then in the Baroque they would go to 200%, having more of whatever it is, more movement, more folds in the cloth, more wrinkles, more curls of the hair, more of everything, so as to overwhelm one with lavishness. That's what you think of with the Baroque. It's excessive. This is Bernini's David, and it exhibits motion. That is, it is, even though it's a sculpture and it's perfectly still and not moving, the formal elements in it, the big arcs, and from different angles, say the diagonals, create motion. It feels as though the thing is moving. And it's not just an illusion. When you're standing in the space of this work, you feel as though you want to get out of its way. It's like it's the arm sticking out into space. This is pitching forward, seen from this angle, feels as though it's going to tip, and that's in the process of moving. This concept of David is completely different from the one from the High Renaissance. Michelangelo's David is a timeless work, and it's even though it's telling the story, that aspect of the story is where David is sort of contemplating or just looking out into space towards Goliath, thinking about what's about to happen, rather than something where there's action going on. Here, the artist has stopped the motion in mid swing, and so that we feel as though he's about to continue the swing, and then that's where the motion comes from. He also has a very powerful expression on his face. He's of concentration and effort that is being expressed. So if you're adding to a list of characteristics of the Baroque, one of them is stopping a moment in time and expressing motion. And what's more is if you look at the things that are surrounding him, there's a piece of cloth here, there's some sort of bag here going around his shoulder. There's the armor for Goliath, or the armor that he was going to wear but he didn't. Other things, objects that are on the ground here. Excessiveness, that is, putting extra stuff in for realism's sake, I guess. Just to put more stuff in. That's part of the another characteristic of the Baroque. So we have emotion, and motion, and stopping a moment in time, and all those things are going into what makes a Baroque work Baroque. Here's another example. It's Apollo and Daphne. In this case, it's a mythological story, whereas the previous one was a Christian story. And we're going to see throughout the Baroque, especially in painting, you're going to see both. There's a preponderance of Christian stories, but mythological stories occur as well. There are opportunities to show idealism. If you look at, say, the faces here, or idealized faces, even though this one is this woman is sort of yelling. Her face, or her facial type, comes from the Greek classical face. And the proportions of the figures are all idealized as well. But again, there is this emphasis on motion, and the thing is moving. And also the virtuoso performance, that is, this is stone, and there's lots of things sticking out in every direction, and it looks like it's very, very fragile and delicate, and it seems like an impossible thing for someone to have carved out of a rock. And it is also an aspect of the Baroque, in that it's just the craftsmanship of things, the showing off of doing things over the top. In the story here, this is Apollo is a god, and he falls in love. I think Cupid fires an arrow into him, causing him to be in love with Daphne, and Daphne has another arrow shot to make her not fall in love, to want to run away from Apollo. One of those things that Cupid was just trying to incite some sort of conflict. And so there's a chase in the woods, and when he gets to her, she cries out to her father, the god, who turns her into a tree. And so what we see here is the moment of transformation, where part of her body is tree-like. That is, her toes down here. Her toes, little roots are growing out of her toes. Let's see. You can't see it as very well though, but there's little roots coming out of her toes, and there's leaves are coming out of her fingers. So capturing a moment of time where an event is occurring, and you're seeing it in the process of a change from one thing to another. There's some bark growing there. But looking at the hair, the various textures of the hair, smooth and rough, and cloth, and moving cloth that is blowing in the wind, we see a lot of this. This is Bernini was the main sculptor of the whole Baroque period, and most everything was either by him or his style dominated everything. And it's also meant to be seen from all different angles, instead of something that is just in a niche and you just see it from one angle. Being able to walk around it and participate in it. That is, the viewer is part of the work, in the sense that they are in the space of the work, and that they can relate to it. is part of a Baroque characteristic. All right, this last work for sculpture is called the Ecstasy of Saint Teresa, and it exhibits, all of the things that we think of as the Baroque. And first of all, in the interim between the High Renaissance and the Baroque, in that 1500s, there was the Protestant Reformation in the early part of the 1500s, and that caused a giant change in the Catholic Church. There was a Council of Trent in the middle of the century, which lasted, I don't know, a decade or more, and in it, the uh, the leaders of the church got together and worked out, what are we going to do about this, the Protestantism, and for some things they decided, yes, they have a point about this or that, but other things they doubled down on and increased. But they wanted to respond to one particular thing that interests us for the Baroque, is how they dealt with art, because art in the Catholic Church throughout the preceding centuries, had been one of you know the Catholic Church loved art. They would use it as a mean to decorate, to make the churches much grander, much richer, as a way to tell stories for I guess the illiterate masses who would come and see the things, and just to make it much more special is just uh, opportunities to spend money because the church was very rich. It also gave the um, uh, the people who came to the church opportunities for giving to the church by uh, hiring artists to make things for the church. And the Protestants criticized this aspect of Catholicism, in that it seemed close to idolatry, having all of these idols inside a church. And even though the Catholic Church's position was that they were not idols, that they were things that you use to look at and contemplate spiritual things, that the object itself was not an object of veneration. Uh, the Protestants, made that case, and so in Protestant art, they stopped having art in their own churches. In fact, they got rid of it, and they had lots of churches in the north, in Protestant lands, where they just had whitewashed churches without any decorations at all. But the Catholic Church, they responded by wanting to increase the art and use it for like proselytizing purposes. They wanted more people to come to the church to see the art, to experience it, and they wanted art that had an effect on them, that is an emotional effect. Uh, that this is the origin of why things are much more emotional in Baroque art, and that it's attempting to persuade you and to make a reaction uh, uh, in you, and having works of art that include you in it. That is, you are in the space of the art, and it's something about the art is that you can relate to in terms of your physical space, is a way to sort of bring you in. These are aspects of the Baroque that came from that Counter Reformation uh, aspect of the Catholic Church. All right, this work is not just the sculpture here that we're going to look at, the Ecstasy of Saint Teresa. This is Saint Teresa, and there's an angel here. They're in this niche, an architectural niche, a little recess in the wall, and it's surrounded by columns here, and the wall itself sort of bulges out and has an opening to show you this event occurring here. And the architecture, lavishly decorated architecture with lots and lots of different textures and marbles and stuff. Uh, Look at this pediment up here. It's called a broken pediment. There's two different levels of it, and every surface of it is filled with stuff. You can look at it. The dentils here. All of this comes from classical antiquity, but it's just lavish. Every bit is busy with decoration, and the entablature goes all around the room, and it's got little putti up here with fruit and stuff, just to add extra uh, extra value, I guess, of the experience. It's the whole thing is to create an experience. This is inside a church, and it's just the transept wing of a small church, and it's just it looks like it's got $1 billion worth of marble cut, the most rare rare and expensive marbles that are cut in such a way as to create this like uh, malachite or something here, or things that are rare, and sliced in such a way so as to get these mirror image versions of all the grain. Uh, so it's almost as if they wanted to just spend money to be spending money to show you lavishness and uh, sumptuousness, like this is a giant treasure. And the fact that it's a transept arm means that you are standing here in front of it, and as if you're an audience member in a theater. Like this is a big theater set with a stage, and on that stage, an event is happening, and on either side here is also things happening. This looks like theater boxes, like you would have above a stage, and certain kinds of theater where patrons would come and see uh, the event on the stage, and you can see there's sculpted images of figures up here. Here's a close up of it. It's made so as to look as though illusionistically there's space back here, and that there's this is the members of the Cornaro family who are the donors of the uh, of this whole event and this whole extravaganza that you see. So that's all of this is Baroque stuff. All of the decoration, the fact that it's theatrical, the act that you're standing here in the space where this witnessing an event with other people, fictively witnessing it with you. So all of this is part of that Baroque theatricality and drama. Now we're looking at it in a so a photographer has lit this up so you can see all of this texture and stuff. But in the normal course of events, this would be rather dark, and the light would be coming from up here. There's a hidden window up here. You can't see it, but there's a window up there with light coming in, and light streams down this gilt bronze lines of that come down to that represent rays of light, and they actually literally make rays of light coming down to illuminate this sculpture. So all of those things are aspects of the Baroque, the theatricality, the over-the-top, lavish decoration. And the figure itself, let's look at the thing. The story being told here is that a saint named Teresa, who was a nun, in just not centuries ago, but only a generation ago, I think, from when this was made, was a nun who had what's called an ecstatic experience. That is, she is in her cell in a convent where she meditates as nuns are taught to do, and meditate on different aspects of spiritualism, and sometimes they go into a kind of a trance, and in that trance they have visions, and she experienced what's called an ecstatic vision, where she described later in her diary, I guess, where she said that uh, she could feel the presence of God, and it felt as though that it is both painful and pleasurable at the same time, and that there was an angel who had a flaming arrow. There's the arrow, who was stabbing her in the heart with his flaming arrow, and it was painful, but she didn't want it to stop, and so she described in this detail this ecstatic experience that she had, this vision in her diary, and that got published, and people it was a bestseller at the time, and so the Catholic Church thought, we want to promote this. This is something that we want people to come to church to have experiences, to see that this is what Christianity is about, and that people should have a direct relationship with God, and that they should have spiritual experiences of this kind. They want to promote this. So in addition to promoting martyrs, they also promoted this kind of thing. And so Bernini, who is given the task of creating this entire experience, that is the whole chapel, is done by Bernini. So he does the architecture part, he does the sculpture part, he does the theatrical lighting part with the window and the light coming down. All these things are Bernini's special effects. This is he's like a movie director making a blockbuster movie. He has this huge block of marble that he's carved. It looks like a cloud, and she's on this cloud as a figure floating in the air. It looks as though the sculpture is floating. The way it's lit, look back from here, you can't see how it is supported. It just is floating. Apparently, there's iron bars on the backside of it that's holding up, so it doesn't fall. But it looks illusionistically as though it's floating. Then you have the problem from Bernini's perspective. How do you represent an ecstatic vision, something that occurring inside someone's head? Well, she does say the image of an angel, so he can represent an angel, and there's the angel, and the angel has a sword. I'm sorry, an arrow, and he makes it out of bronze. Notice there's lots of different. It's a multimedia thing. There's bronze and there's marble of different kinds, so as to dazzle the eye with lots of different stuff. But then he expresses what's happening inside of Saint Teresa by manipulating the cloth that she's wearing. There's this robe, is just voluminous robe of lots and lots and lots of cloth, wrinkling around and moving in this way, this agitated way that looks kind of like flame. It's the agitation that's occurring inside her soul. The spiritual event is expressed through all of this kind of convoluted drapery. Also, the drapery of the angel itself is this flowing of drapery and movement is very reminiscent of flame. And as you see again, just like Apollo and Daphne, it's a virtuoso performance of carving different textures. Looks like very difficult to carve kinds of textures, where there's rough and smooth and very delicate things, and also things like this little bit of cloth, that can see it there, is also like David's sling, something that's just like a piece of such a small piece of marble. You wonder how they even managed to carve it out of one piece. Expressions on faces. Here, let's look at her face. Her lips are open. Here, her eyes. It looks like her eyes are open, but they are rolled up, as if she's in the middle of having a fit of some kind. Her body sort of flows into the drapery as if it's made of the same material. And there again, drapery is agitated. There's another look at it from a different angle. So you can see that the artist has made what I would call an extravaganza. That is something that is just filled with stuff, over the top, theatrical kind of thing, and he's designed the entire experience of the viewer coming in. All of these things are Baroque things. So that's sculpture, and this is all the sculpture we're going to be doing for the Baroque. The rest is going to be painting and architecture.